So just a quick reminder that we are going to be recording this meeting, and we're doing so because we want to share the event with our community after it's finished. And we also want to learn how to improve our future digital town halls, so we always know like what to do better. And we're also, this is history, guys. Like, we're making history right now, so we want to record so we can document it and, you know, look back on it later on.
Welcome. So, as we commemorate the anniversary of Brown v. Board, we want to remember what this movement is about. The students. Students that are learning in segregated school systems even after Brown v. Board. So we would like to uplift the voices of the resilient, tenacious students within our very own New York City public school system. Help me in welcoming my friend and fellow TTC member, coming to you from Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Miriam Diallo.
Hi guys, I'm going to be giving my testimony. The allegory of America. His only dream was to come to America, and my only dream is to leave. He came to countries where opportunities seemed abundant, but couldn't see all the recipients look the same. If you work hard and keep to yourself, success will come your way. America is the greatest country in the world. Yes, Baba, my dreams will flourish. I walked around with a smile on my face as I told people, you will remember me. I flaunt the ideas in my head to an audience of air. But as I looked in, I was optimistic because we were in the land of opportunity. But as I looked into my hands and saw the cards that were dealt, all I had was a scrap of paper that wrote the word sight. When I was pushed onto a lot and told to fly, I turned to the other kids, all with a homogeneous background, and they had their parents behind them, handing them the tools to build a plane. While I and the other first generation kids, the other Black and brown kids, the other disadvantaged kids stood what was actually an alleyway forgotten by the world. And we stumbled into every wrong choice with nothing to guide us but our own judgment. In America, we were Black. Slavery, Reconstitution, Jim Crow, Brown v. Board walked behind every young fellow that looked the part. Incarceration and inequitable options lay below their feet, and we were no different. We claimed sanction in the hood, went to schools that we didn't know are underfunded, competed for opportunities that we didn't know were right, and we gave full trust into a system that failed us. But Baba, my dreams are too big here. I remember in elementary school, we recited the Pledge of Allegiance, sang the national anthem, and we never forgot the Black national anthem. My third grade teacher once asked us, does anybody know why it's important to sing Lift Every Voice and Sing? We didn't know the answer, and she told us to remember those who fought before us, like Dr. King, and the fight that still must go on. But teacher, what are we still fighting for? Marshall did say that segregation was a violation of my 14th Amendment, mine. The first thing I learned in elementary school was that they couldn't give me everything I needed. They called me smart and pointed me to places that I would flourish. My fifth grade teacher once told my mom, your daughter is really smart. She would be perfect for prep. They always said that school was no good for me, that my talents was better used elsewhere. But Baba, why doesn't this school have the same thing as the other one for me to succeed? I went to the test, I looked around, and I saw kids that looked like me competing to get a quality education. I saw kids that looked like me competing like the Hunger Games. Most of us won't make it. But why do I have to choose between a good school and my friends? Ultimately, I chose a compromise. But now I learned it was better to choose nothing at all. I went to a Black school that had all the classes, but none of the resources. Overcrowded classrooms, trashed hallways, teachers fighting over laptops, car seats, teachers fighting over classrooms, teachers fighting over Windows poll. Marshall said that this court should make it clear that that's not what our Constitution stands for. Did they? Did we? I took all the regents, all the APs, and all the college classes that were thrown at me, and at best, I did mediocre. Here was a school trying to help us, but like most Black and brown schools, they face their inevitable fate. But Bob, I'm doing the best with what I have. How can you expect more? Doing your best? Your best is not good enough. Slowly, me and my other peers started to accept it. Our best is not good enough. The narrative that was built around us was starting to seem true. They didn't see our worth. And we believed we simply weren't good enough.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you. That was powerful. Thank you. And just so things to keep in mind as we move on in this event, we would like for everyone to keep their video on and stay muted if we're not in a breakout room. And please try to type only in the chat what you would say in person. We just want to be respectful of everyone. Thank you.
So a couple more guidelines to just keep us on track here. Always feel comfortable to ask for literacy moments. So if you ever need to clarify something or ask someone to go deeper to explain deeper what they were saying, please feel free to do that. You should also assume positive intent and take responsibility for impact.
And also, we want you all to call each other in and not out. So feel free to call each other in, make room for other people, as well as also use your own voice and make room for yourself. And also, no one knows everything and everyone knows something. So together we know a lot. So feel free to use your voice to speak in the chat, to also listen to everyone else and everyone else's opinions.
Just some expectations for this meeting. There will be icons at the top right corner of each slide, and they will correspond to each thing happening in the slide. So for student testimonies, there will be a megaphone. For data, there will be a chart, and that's just to kind of show you what each slide is about. There will also be a text box option, text box image in the top right-hand corner, and that's just to show that we would like you to respond in the chat. And then the puzzle image is to show that we're going to be participating in breakout rooms where we can go into depth further and have more conversation.
Word.
Now I'm going to pass it on to Matt and Naya to talk about the state of integration in New York City.
Thank you so much, Carla. Hey, everybody. This is Matt Gonzalez from the NYU Metro Center. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an adult ally and a policy coach for Integrate NYC, and really excited to be in partnership with all of our friends in this conversation. So what I want to do is, because we're celebrating the 66th anniversary of Brown and really commemorating the movement for integration and really thinking about how New York City became to be one of the most segregated cities in the country, what we wanted to do was talk through, how did we get here, and what are some of the historical markers. So what I'm going to do is try to fit about 200 years worth of history in 4 slides. So bear with me as I walk through some of these, but we will be sharing more resources after to kind of walk through some more of the detail. And so what I wanted to do is, as I was looking at this, most of us think about Brown as like the starting point for the desegregation movement. And while that was like a critical starting point in terms of the policy and the federal government support, there was advocacy and activism being led, particularly by Black women in New York City, but across the country to push the movement for integration. So I wanted to highlight 2 key folks. One was Elizabeth Cisco, who was a mother in Jamaica, Queens, in the late 1890s. So before we were even in the 1900s. Elizabeth Cisco was a businesswoman and a community leader, and she brought a lawsuit against the Queens Board of Education. And so this was even before New York City boroughs were together. And so at this point, Elizabeth Cisco brought a lawsuit to admit her child into a white school, and lost the lawsuit, actually. And so so a lot of this activism was really important. And so in the late 1800s and going into the early 1900s, you have people like Ella Baker who come to New York City and move into Harlem and really spend her decades really organizing advocates and parents in Harlem and really pushing the city to move towards integration. So we can go to the next slide. So in response to all of this grassroots advocacy and energy, New York, and obviously, and the 1954 Brown decision, a few months after the Brown case was kind of confirmed by the Supreme Court, New York City's Board of Education said, we have to do something, we have to support this. And so what they did, and a lot of this actually is going to sound really familiar to folks who followed this in New York City, but the Board of Education convened what they called a Commission on Integration. It was a group of community members, community leaders, educators, activists, all coming together to talk about how to integrate New York City schools. Does that sound familiar? We called it a School Diversity Advisory Group, you know, a couple hundred years later, but what we saw was that there was an effort by the city to respond to Brown and to the advocacy of the city. And so that commission produced a report. The short end of the policies is they were calling for open enrollment and rezoning policies, and trying to merge schools together. There's a lot more detail, but we can go to the next slide. And so, as you may know, like that plan didn't get implemented. And so a month after the Board of Education at the time released their plan, 500,000 Black and Brown students planned a school boycott, which is what this day was supposed to be. We were going to have our young people leading another boycott to commemorate this anniversary, but also the fact that we still have a long way to go. And so because the students didn't feel like the plan went far enough, and they also didn't trust the Board of Education to actually follow through with some of these plans, they led this boycott. That was responded to by a much smaller protest led by primarily white mothers in Queens. About 10,000 marched to the Board of Education to really halt a lot of this work. And so this next slide, I think we all can understand that at this point, between the 1970s and 2012, I haven't done the math on how many decades that is, but between the 1970s and 2012, New York City mayors, educational leaders did basically nothing to create system-wide integration policy. Despite some work that was happening in District 1 in the early 90s that was ultimately destroyed by the Bloomberg administration, there had been no systemic effort or priority from our mayors, from the chancellors to actually lead the schools towards integration. And that's where we kind of move us into to where we are now. And I'm going to pass to my colleague Naya to talk through some of the more modern things that have happened.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Naya. I am the Integrated Schools Project Director at New York Appleseed. I am thankful and blessed to be sharing this space with over 200 of you. And I am going to try to squeeze 8 years, so not 200, but 8 years into 2 minutes. So the movement for integration between 2012 and 2015 really was spurred by thinking through these 2 reports that got published and thinking through a system divided. So in 2012, New York Times released a report that said that New York City was one of the most segregated school systems in the country. Not something we want to be famous for. 2014, UCLA published a report that said that New York State has the most segregated schools in the country. So again, New York really wasn't looking too hot as these reports came out in recognizing that we were still living in such a segregated system, right? There was, however, a glimmer of hope, I will say. In 2012, this is actually something that Appleseed helped with working on, but the very first diversity and admissions plan was adopted by the DOE at PS 133. From 2015 to 2017, we really started to see some policies start to flourish within the New York City Department of Education. And so we really started to have more than a glimmer of hope, but actually action that is happening. So for example, we had in 2015, the Diversity and Admissions pilot program, that PS 133 added 7 additional schools. On top of that, we also had the launch of a policy statement for diversity in New York City public schools that made it that integration, equity, and inclusion was something that we needed to focus on and rally around in New York City. And then from 2018 to 2019 is when we started to see funding and plans starting to come together, right? So by 2018, we had 2 district-wide diversity in District 1, also in District 15. We also had the New York State Socioeconomic Integration Program, which was NYCIP, which was a state grant. And we also had city grants that were made by the New York City Department of Education. So as it stands in this time, there were 3 district-wide plans, 5 city grants, and 13 state grants that were all for planning and program development for integration in New York City. And to give you a look at what we look like mapped out, the ones in these different colors, the ones in color are all different places where there's either a district-wide diversity plan, there's a state grant, or there's a city grant. And then the folks in gray are the ones that right now don't have any sort of plan or have a grant. However, I want to challenge folks that if you are in one of those districts that are in gray, this is the perfect time to start thinking about the conversations that we have today, to bring them back to your community, and then reach out to us to see what we need to do to bring these conversations into action for your community districts. So I want to take a pause because we just through like 200-ish years of the movement for integration at you. So I want to give it a second to pause and reflect on 2 questions. Where were you in this timeline when you entered the integration movement? Also acknowledging that today might be your first day. Welcome. We're happy to have you here. And then also, what is your vision for this movement in the future? So I know that was a short pause, but you're gonna have time to discuss. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna separate you into breakout rooms right now to discuss these 2 questions. So you're gonna see a little thing, a little pop-up on your screen that's gonna say join the breakout room, and you can click on that. Remember, once you get to the breakout room, to reintroduce yourself with the folks that you're gonna be discussing these questions with.
All right. Hello. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had very pleasant conversations and very insightful conversations with one another. Right now, we're gonna be debriefing what our responses are. But first of all, we're gonna see what everyone had to offer, like in their own respective conversation. I know my partner Merlin has something to say about the first question, so if she's ready to talk about that, she's free to do so.
Yes, thank you. So the first question was, where were you on this timeline when you entered the integration movement? And I entered the integration movement very, very recently. It was just this past December when I was being presented a presentation about activism, and it was specifically on this organization called Teens Take Charge, which I had no idea about. And it was about these 2 students that went to schools just miles apart, but received completely different educations. And I came to this realization that I lived that experience, that I lived what they were talking about. And it was mind-blowing to me how New York City public schools were segregated. Because the idea of segregation was like, I thought it didn't exist anymore. And I was so upset, I was angered, but I was determined to do something about it. So I joined Teens Take Charge, and here we are now. What are people saying in the chat? Are they sharing their experiences?
Sorry. I see a lot of people shouting everyone out. Thank you, Josiah and Tori, for sharing your stories in Sarah's breakout room. Feel free to share your stories down here too.
Yes, definitely.
What that's experiencing.
I'd love to hear them.
I know I started to advocate for integration in schools literally last year. I never knew that schools in the NYC were segregated, and my friend had invited me to Integrate's Retire Segregation party in Times Square, and I was fed knowledge and I was educated on what our system looks like and how unfair it is. And I started to realize all these inequities that existed in my school. And yeah, I just decided that I was going to apply for Integrate NYC, and I was going to advocate for this, because who better to advocate for this than a student who has experienced all these things firsthand, you know? Let me see the chat again. I see that Danielle got involved in 2018 during her sophomore year, period. Me too. 2018, a lot of 2018s. And yeah, awesome. Yeah, a lot of 2018s. I see y'all. We the same. I got Francie. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, but I see that you got involved in 2016. An amazing movement to be a part of. I agree. Retire segregation was one of my first experiences with activism. I see you, Carla. A lot of 2018s. I'm really happy. 2019. Iman got in 2016. 4th grade. Awesome. 4th grade. 2017. Naomi 2014. 2001. Matt. Awesome.
All right. Really good responses, everyone. Yeah, it's just really inspiring to see like the different time periods everyone got involved in the integration movement. I think that really serves to show like what our own visions we have for the integration movement. I know for mine, so I'm in a specialized high school, so I get to see firsthand the privileges that I myself experience and many other students experience. One being such that we have I have resources that I take for granted, because I believe that there are other students out there who don't have access to the same resources that I have, and so they look forward or rely on school to actually get those resources, because they couldn't get those resources from their community. So, but like, that's kind of silly, isn't it? Like, why should students have to rely on school to get the resources that they need to be on the same playing field as everyone else, right? So I guess my own vision would be to see, in an ideal setting, people like from a bunch of different backgrounds who have very different stories, being able to share those stories and perspectives, and then them having the resources to be able to provoke the different living situations they inhabit. And they should then be able to use those resources whenever they can, and not because they have one thing to look forward to. Because what happens if that one thing gets taken away? Then they're at a disadvantage. Jace, what's the chat looking like? What are other people's visions looking like for the integration movement?
The chat looking fire right now. We have visions for the future, the 5 R's of real integration in every school, from Matt the G himself. We have Mary, the 1964 boycott of schools. We have facts going everywhere in the chat right now and looking nice. 1990, walked out of my Brooklyn Technical High School class to protest. That's what I'm talking about right there, protesting. I love it. We must energize each other. Youthfulness all year round. Revolution, period. Youth heard, youth voice being heard. Actual diversity. Right. That part. Real diversity. Walkouts. Soon voices of the future. That part. Our voices are united. Youth power. That's what I'm talking about. Loving the chat. Ooh, y'all getting fast. Restorative justice, access, students are educated, voices being heard. All right, so I'm passing it on to a lovely youth lead, Veronica. Veronica, where you at?
Actually, it's going to be me and Sakira. So hi everybody, I'm Zareth. I'm the CEO and founder of Territorial Empathy, and an organization where we look at how urban equity issues affect marginalized communities. And so part of that recently for us in this context of this pandemic has been trying to understand how COVID-19 is affecting our city, our people, our folks, and how that then translates to the movement. So part of this research, it's still in beta version, but it will be accessible online on our website, and the link is there, and we'll share this afterwards. But we've called this study The Privilege of Health, and it's really looking at the inequities that we are seeing based on income and race and how COVID's affecting people in our community. And the wonderful Zakira is gonna respond to the different data points that I'll be talking about, and she's going to be sharing her experience. So this map that we have here is the COVID cases. So it's part of our dashboard, and you can kind of animate it and see how the cases rise and fall. But it's showing us as of last Monday what COVID looked like for our city. The density and the saturation in the color indicates that there's more cases. And the lighter it is, the least cases there are. There's a really dark space. I don't know if Rachel, you can point to it. Perfect. That is Corona, Queens. That is zip code 11368. And it's one of the hotspots in the world for coronavirus. It's a 1 mile radius, and roughly as of last week, there were 4,000 cases there in a 1 mile radius. Comparatively, in different areas of New York, we'll have 400, a tenth of the cases. This is really a hotspot in the world. And Sakira, I'd love to kind of get your read on all of this.
Thank you so much, Eric. So thank you so much for firstly breaking that down for us, because now that I'm looking at that map, now that I'm looking at this map, I'm noticing that there are a lot of darker areas inside the Bronx, as well as in certain parts of Queens. I'm just noticing a real disparity between darker areas and lighter areas in certain parts of New York City. And I'm just wondering if a different factor is also involved in that.
Great questions. Yeah, so that's actually what we're curious about. We're like, what's going on here and who's being affected by this? So this map is actually showing us the same type of information about coronavirus cases, but in a very different way. So as we can see, every color corresponds to a race, and it might be a little hidden depending on where you have your pop-up windows, but the red color is talking about Latinx families. So it's taking the zip code and it's finding the predominant race in that zip code. So blue indicates predominantly Caucasian areas, and then orange, African American, that sea green, Asian. And so what this is really showing us, that diameter, that size of that circle, is showing us the magnitude of COVID-19 cases. And what we're seeing is that in predominantly Hispanic and African American areas, those circles are bigger. So again, showing us the inequities into what's happening with this crisis. And then we also looked at, and actually, Zakira, I would love to kind of send it over to you and have you tell us where you live and kind of how you're experiencing this reality when looking at race and COVID in your community.
Thank you, Zared. So I'm looking at this map now, and I live in Queens, Jamaica, Queens to be precise. And I'm looking at the map, and I'm just noticing that there are a lot of big red circles, as well as a lot of big yellow circles, especially inside Queens, and as well as parts of the Bronx. And I'm just really noticing disparity, not only in the location of these circles, but also in the races that are affected. So thank you so much for sharing this map with us, because this has really opened up my eyes to a lot of things.
Great. So then the last thing that I'll talk about, and again, this research is more available, we'll be updating it, a more developed copy will be available by the end of the week. But this one's specifically looking at the curve. So we've heard in the news, we see Cuomo doing his daily briefings, flatten the curve, flatten the curve. And so we decided to look at that curve by the predominant income of that specific area, that zip code, the same things that we were looking at before. And so we separated this by income bands, high, medium, and low. And so what we're seeing down there with the lighter blue is how wealthier folks, the higher income folks, median income folks in the city, they don't even follow the same public health curve. That pattern that's affecting all of us, it doesn't really even apply to them. But we see that middle class and lower income folks, they're being disproportionately affected by this crisis. And this, as the Secure tells us from some of the takeaways in our research, is because a lot of affluent New Yorkers left the city. And so the brunt of this crisis has really been put on the backs of poor Black and brown folks who are still on the service lines, that are keeping our food chain alive, that are doing all of these things. And an important point before passing it over to Sakira is that now is school is at home. And so we can't, before we thought that school might be some type of equalizer, but that's no longer the case. So actually with Integrate NYC, we're working to design some policy where we could maybe influence or advise school admission policy to take into account the toll that coronavirus has taken on communities, and maybe that will influence future admissions processes, understanding and highlighting that the burden's not equal for all New Yorkers. Zakira?
Yes, so firstly, just looking at this graph, I'm just really astonished at the idea that for the line for high income at the very bottom, y'all, the lighter blue line, we can see that it doesn't even have a curve. It looks pretty straight to me. How does it look to you, Zaire?
It looks pretty straight. That doesn't look like a curve. It looks like a very sharp line.
So we can see that they aren't being affected. So if we go to our takeaways on the next slide. So just to kind of wrap up and get some takeaways from our graphs and the impact of COVID-19 in general, we can see that communities of color are disproportionately impacted. The virus is 2 times as deadly for Black and Latinx New Yorkers than white people. Wealth correlated with ability to social distance is definitely another factor that's played. So we can see that in the Upper East Side, West Village, Soho, and Brooklyn Heights, for a few, the population has decreased by 40% or more, while the rest of the city saw modest changes. So we can see that wealthier folks are able to leave the city. They're able to leave the virus hot zones and leave places like the Upper East Side, West Village, Soho, and Brooklyn Heights, and escape the virus in a sense. That's why the curve isn't flattening for wealthier folks. So now I'm gonna pass it on to Marlon, so we could get a little bit more perspective on our student testimonies.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that data and all of that information. Thank you. So now we would like to continue to celebrate student voices, and please join me in welcoming my fellow TTC member and friend, Carleni, coming to you from Marble Hill, Bronx.
Justice. When you're cruising down the streets of the Bronx, you're bound to hear, "Yer, que lo que, wagwan." You will see neighborhoods of Black and Hispanic communities lined with ARC stores and bodegas. But let me tell you about the hood, where our struggles are constantly silenced by sirens. The place where most of our people live off the EBT. But even then, they still struggle to have a meal. The place where we have to continuously tell each other, safe up, because we never know if that will be our last encounter. On each corner, there's a store full of low-income minorities, no jobs, no help, but that's the hood. It's sad seeing the neighborhood corner store turn into a foyo, just like that. but that's the hood. Tobacco, weed, cigarettes, alcohol, crack, K2, the list goes on. A product of the government, but that's the hood. Take the 1 train all the way down to 42nd, the Big Apple. Concrete jungle where dreams are made of. Yeah, that's a song from. The city of Showtime or Bachateame Mama. Once you hear, change please, can I get $1? You know you in New York. It's crazy how the streets became home. They made us. But somehow, technical difficulties, sorry. But somehow, this is the land of the free, the land of the brave. The Statue of Liberty, a symbol of hope and success. The symbol of freedom and peace means nothing to us. Because at the end of the day, we live in a land where justice for my brothers and sisters will never be served. But that's America. Here, the color of your skin defines you. It oppresses you. It limits your opportunities. The same constitution that says we were all created equally was written by slave owners. But that's America, right? If this is the land of the free, the land of the brave, how is it that the darker you are, the more metal detectors you must go through? We are treated like criminals from a young age, with unfair rules and disciplinary actions, with cops in our school buildings and prisons just waiting to take us in. I'm exhausted, so exhausted from hearing we don't have enough funds for that. The city doesn't provide us with those opportunities. You need an average of 80 or higher to attend a high school. All my life, I was surrounded with the brightest students. But sadly, only less than half of us succeed. But this is what we call the land of equal opportunity, right? I am constantly reminded that I am just a minority. That colored people, they just don't get the same opportunities. Seeing that America was always made for the lightest complexion was the biggest eye-opener of my life. Sometimes I sit and I think to myself, can I really become successful? Can I really achieve the goals my parents couldn't? In a distraught society, sometimes the most simplest wishes become unrealistic. In a world full of hatred, competition, oppression, racism, discrimination, violence, and inequality. In a world full of saying rest in peace next to a 14-year-old's name. In a world full of hands up, don't shoot. In a world full of Trayvon Martin, 17, Michael Brown, 18, Antoine Rose, 13, Stephen Clark, 22. It does not matter if you're Mexican, Muslim, Jamaican, Jewish, Haitian, Puerto Rican. You will always have to work 1,000 times harder in order to get treated close to equal as the ones who dominate this country. And that is the reason why we're here. To continue the fight our brothers and sisters thought they won 66 years ago. Fighting for equality in every subject you can think of. To continue the fight to ensure that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place, as said by Chief Justice Earl Warren in 1954. And that, my friends, is America. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlani. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much. I just want to share a couple of actions that Teens Take Charge is currently doing. At Teens Take Charge, we recognize that school segregation extends beyond the walls of school. That young people's lives outside of school, they're just as segregated as they are inside of school. And that is why we are fighting to save SYEP, to end the achievement gap that is clearly visible between students. SYEP provides career readiness for all thousands and thousands of students. And Mayor Bill de Blasio ending that program is unfair. Just as we have turned virtual in school, we can turn SYEP virtual. Furthermore, another campaign that we are currently working on is Education Unscreened, where we aim to end screens in New York City public schools. And you can check out our website to follow our daily actions and sign the petition to save SYEP as well as to sign a petition to end screens in New York City. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Erica, an Asian Pacific American here to testify for ASAP, Asian American Student Advocacy Project at CACF. That's right, I, an Asian, have been invited here to speak about the Asian perspective, Asian experience. People want to hear about how it feels to be that smart kid in the corner, scribbling away at some math problem. People want to hear about how it's like to be the white man's best friend. We're comedic relief in 90 sitcoms. We make comfort food that hopefully slides down easier than the racial slurs thrown at us. Hold on, calculating, resources galore. Okay, I'll start over. Hi, I'm Erica, an Asian Pacific American. I'm not here to talk about what it means to be Asian or to have my blood-stained existence tokenized or answer that question of, are Asians really people of color? Because truthfully, the world's confusion is contagious. People seem to think that Asians are only one thing, or maybe they only want to hear one thing. Speak up, my white teacher eggs me on. And so I do. I speak my mother's trauma. I speak coping with suicidal ideation as my teacher hands back 0 after 0. I speak being trapped in a school with white peers and feeling like not even a person compared to their brown hair and blue eyes and interesting lives articulated in perfect English. The system tells us to focus on the numbers. The numbers will get you far. Our parents who've had to adopt to this system tell us, we're only numbers to the people here, so polish them. People say numbers don't lie. Good smart students get good grades and are thereby entitled to the city's bulk of resources. The rest of us are left to fight over the scraps. This is the logic of our school system and the logic that my parents, not here to take risks, have had carved into their hands next to their scars. I'd like the people who think that all APAs are thriving in this system to meet my friends who've been condemned to the label of bad Asian. I'd like them to meet my friends who feel disengaged with academics and prefer to play ball, but at the park, not their underfunded schools. I'd like them to see the glasses shattering in families over a report card on top of frozen pizza dinners and the stress of essential work during this time. See how it feels to be rejected by the city and your community at the same time, by those who ignore factors like language access, poverty, and mental health. COVID-19 has made it loud and clear that our school system is full of inequities. More than ever before, students are slipping through the cracks like ghosts. As immigrants, on top of worrying about their schoolwork and dealing with poverty, in a system full of language barriers and devoid of cultural competence, many APA youth are their parents' translators, their siblings' teachers, and more. APA community is complicated and diverse. There are those who reject integration for fear that something will be taken away from them or their children. But what makes a child any more entitled to a quality education than another? APA community itself is rife with inequities, colorism, and anti-Blackness. Yet among the flurry of ignorant, accusatory voices, we are here and committed to working with our fellow students of color, immigrant students, and marginalized students for equitable access to resources and opportunities because truthfully, we need it too. Thank you.
Please read the following statement with me silently as I read it. We call on all of us to stand together in the face of those who want to keep the unjust status quo. We cannot continue to allow misrepresentation and prejudice about students of color to divide us. Instead, we need to listen and learn from each other's experiences. Only through solidarity will we be able to prevail in the fight for equity and integration. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for our next student testimony, Danielle.
Hi, everyone. You all can hear me, right? Okay, just making sure. My name is Danielle Johnson. I'm a first-generation Black student in the New York City public school system. The issue of desegregating New York City public schools is incredibly important to me because I feel like an imposter, like so many other Black, brown students in this incredibly diverse city. Growing up in a diverse city, but walking into a segregated school isn't the way anyone should have to live. When I was younger, I was always surrounded by people that looked like me, for the most part. I went to 2 majority Black Latinx elementary middle schools in the Bronx. My elementary middle school experience was one of community and comfort. I never felt like I couldn't relate to my peers because we lived in similar neighborhoods and had similar backgrounds. That community and that comfort I had grown up knowing quickly fell through once I reached high school. Despite being located in a majority Black Latinx neighborhood, my school is majority white, a stark contrast from its surrounding schools. I remember walking through those doors feeling like I stuck out like a sore thumb. Every day walking through those doors, I feel alienated, like a single piece of black pepper in a sea of salt. School should be considered your home away from home, yet all I can feel at school is out of place. Over the past 3 years, I've dealt with imposter syndrome. I, along with other Black students at school, have discussed feeling this way. Oftentimes, we feel like we have to prove that we belong, not only to our peers, but to ourselves. I've always felt like I had to work twice as hard, putting in unnecessary effort to prove that I've earned my place in my own school. Imagine the feeling of knowing that in any given classroom you walk into, you'll be one of the only few students of color, and you will almost always be the only Black student. My current school has approximately 400 students, yet less than 21 Black students. The same number as the federal drinking age. New York City is one of the most diverse cities in the nation, yet it has the single most segregated school system. How does it feel to be number one for having an incredibly binary student population? What does that say about our school system? What does that say to kids that look and live in neighborhoods that reflect mine? That we are not worthy of seeing ourselves in our schools and our curriculum, despite seeing that diversity on our streets? Desegregated, you say. Are we sure about that? Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle, for sharing your story with us. Integrate NYC is asking for a student call to action. We are asking that you sign on to our coalition's one-line letter and that you also post a quote or insight from tonight with the hashtag #OurFutureIsIntegrated. You should also follow Integrate NYC on Twitter and Instagram for more actions this week. And if you choose to post a quote or insight, to please tag us in that post. Now I'm going to pass it on to Veronica.
Hi, I'm Veronica Morris. I'm in 7th grade and I attend a public middle school in District 15. I'm also a middle school lead at Integrate NYC. My school is predominantly white, and because of this, my school gets the proper funding it needs. Every school should have that at the very least. Unfortunately, this is not the case. I chose my school not considering the negative impact screens have on schools and students. I've definitely noticed the lack of diversity my school had, especially compared to a school like MSA 39 in District 15 that already had a lottery system in place. Screens like tests, grades, attendance, and auditions prevent our most vulnerable students from getting the same opportunities as affluent white students. The admissions board only looks at how a student presents themselves in their school environment. What people don't understand is that the way a student acts at school is 100% affected by their home lives. Some students that have home obligations may have trouble turning in a project or assignment due the next day, which will later affect their grades. These screens have been segregating our schools for way too long. They've made an unwanted hierarchy when really all schools should be equally resourced, equally funded, safe, welcoming, and diverse. Now, Zareth will talk about her experience working on the D15 plan.
Thank you, Veronica. So as Veronica mentioned, I was on the planning team that led the District 15 process. It's the first community-led integration initiative in New York City. And I'll talk about a little bit about my research on D15, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's going on now with D15. But essentially, what I'll talk about in this part is that through our research, we learned what many of you know. I didn't know that until I started looking at this work and engaging with it. And it's actually one of the things that moved me the most to continue in this fight. But when I saw the data firsthand and saw how adversely impacted Latinx and Black students were and disproportionately removed from applicant pools, I was stunned. I couldn't believe that this was happening in such a diverse city. Not only did I find that, but then I was able to visualize information for the students that were in that current class and the previous year's class, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And what I found by spatializing all of this information that we have is that in District 15, there were actually sub-districts by race, so that the transition from elementary school to middle school was these very direct paths from the same elementary school sending the same type of student to the higher performing middle schools. Next slide, please. So this is when I'm going to talk about screens and try to illustrate the concept of how they disproportionately affect folks. So I went to a school that you didn't have to apply for middle school, but I definitely know that I was definitely late to school when I was in elementary school more than 5 times. My mom is a single parent, you know, things get out of hand. Sometimes the bus is late, sometimes the train is late. And so when you're enforcing this screen, so 6th graders that have fewer than 5 tardies, what does that do to the applicant pool? So if we see this, it's done by race, and we can picture these donuts being totally filled up. It's like a wolf pack. Everyone's applying, and everyone technically has more or less the same chances if it's a choice-based system, unless you include screens. So this is looking at a simulation of what would have happened to a previous class if that screen was put in place. So we can see instantly that for African American students, that wolf pack is almost like instantly halved just by looking at those 5 tardies. Similar patterns for Latinx students, and we see that actually that is not the case for their Asian and white counterparts in District 15 at least. And then we'll look at another screen in the next slide. This is looking at 6th graders that have received over a 3 on standardized test scores in math or ELA. Look at what this does to particularly the Latinx community. Only 41% of students in D15 would have been able to meet that screen. Again, with African American students, Asian and white students. So it's not that we're creating more access to better performing schools, it's simply that we're not even given the chance to these students when we implement screens like these. And then the next slide, we'll look at what happens to that applicant pool when we combine tardies, absences, and the screen about test scores being 3 or over. When we look at them combined, this almost decimates the pool of Black and Latinx students. 16% of Latinx students would have been eligible to participate in those schools. And so essentially, with this research kind of in hand with our community engagement and different work, made us realize the following, which is, Rachel, yeah, thank you, is what I mentioned before, that there's essentially sub-districts by race. So these 2 maps are showing us connections between elementary schools and middle schools. The little crosses are elementary schools and the houses are middle schools. And so this is District 15 and spans Sunset Park in the south, roughly to the Northern Park slope. And we see that for white students, they essentially, their middle school, their elementary to middle school transition stays within 1 district almost entirely. We see that eastern part of the district is predominantly white, same elementary school, sending the same kids to the same higher performing middle schools. We see MS 51, we see all of these different traits that we don't see for Asian students. And then in the next slide, we'll see what that looks like for African American and Latinx students. We can see that Hispanic students mostly stay in the South, or they did before the plan. They are attending schools like Sunset Park Prep, and they were really not engaging with this other part of the white sub-district. Same for African American students. So what we're really seeing is that when we prevent access to just these possibilities, we're from the get-go reinforcing segregation and creating districts that are more pernicious because everything's hidden within that same border, that same area that's supposed to have equal access to all students. And now Veronica's going to talk about what we did to make this better.
Okay, so in September of 2018, Integrate NYC helped create and pass the D15 Diversity Plan, which abolished all screens in all D15 middle schools. Abolishing these screens was a huge accomplishment and truly diversified our middle schools. The main goal of the D15 plan was to have the communities of District 15 fairly represented in our school system in terms of race and socioeconomic status, and to make our schools a safe and welcoming environment for all students. We compared the enrollment numbers from the 2018-2019 school year and the 2019-2020 school year. And because 52% of the district qualifies for free and reduced lunch as English language learners and live in temporary housing, we were hoping that around 52% of those students were represented in our D15 middle schools. 8 out of the 11 schools met our goal, and throughout the next few years, we'll continue to diversify our schools. Now Zareth will talk about the D15 plan and how it played out in its first year.
All right. So I'll be sharing some data about what happened after we implemented the plan that Veronica briefly described. So we got rid of screens, we kept choice, and we had this priority for lower income students. And so nothing terrible happened, no one died, nothing collapsed, there was no major white flight, and it improved racial and socioeconomic diversity, and more students were matched to their first choice school. So I think this is something that's really important for us to remember when we're thinking about, you know, that integration doesn't have to have all of it. It's not an either or, you know, it's not the schools will get worse, everything's gonna, you know, just go haywire. Actually, it can be done well and it can be done successfully to improve the lives of the kids in the district. Next slide, please. So this is the data. The top graphic is looking at the statistics before the plan, and the bottom one is looking at the statistics after the plan was implemented. Each line has one of the middle schools, and then the demographic, that red bar, is telling us the percent of students, that demographic of students that falls under that category that Veronica mentioned, free and reduced lunch, ELL, or students in temporary housing. Free and reduced lunch, as many of you know, is an indicator that we look at in education to pinpoint lower income students. And so what we can see before the plan is a school like MS 442, less than 20% low income students. And that can't be the case in a city as socioeconomically diverse as ours. And by the same token, Sunset Park Prep, in that region that I showed you guys in the map earlier, had almost 90% lower income students. So the concentration of poverty creates a totally different school community. And in that middle, we see that line that's connecting everything. That line is that 52% figure that Veronica was talking about. So our goal really was to get all the schools as close as possible to that line so we could have schools that look like their district. And so we see that in 2019, this is the first year the plan has been implemented, we see that all schools are getting closer to that line, and we're so excited about what's to come. And then in the next slide, we'll look at the racial demographics in every school. These two top bars, 2018 and 2019 respectively, talk about the similar information, what happened before the plan and after the plan. And we see that for most schools, racial diversity improved greatly. And one of the schools that I spent so much time in was Sunset Park Prep. They used to have 3% white students in Sunset Park Prep, and now that's 13%. So there used to be classes where you wouldn't even see a single white student, and just in 1 year, there's visibility for a new racial group in that school that had never really seen it before the plan was implemented. Next slide, please. And so this slide I think is really important because it kind of speaks to that point that like there was no crazy white flight. We only had 82 less applicants from the year before the plan was implemented to the year after. And there was actually a slight but significant increase of white and Asian students applying to District 15 schools. So no crazy white flight to private school. Everyone was able to kind of continue and get, you know, their choices, as we'll see in the next slide.